I just finished fishing a run about 2 hours previous and losing a fly in the process, but catching a number of whitefish and trout. I wanted to look underneath the surface and see what was going on. It's winter time currently, and water levels are going up and down with lots of silt pouring into the rivers. Sometimes in winter the rivers are low and clear, making visibility excellent. But currently in this river, although it may look very clear from above, the rain has been falling and silt has kept the water to barely a couple of feet of visibility. There's a huge difference between what you can see from above looking vertically down compared to what you can see looking through the water horizontally. That's why ospreys are so good at catching fish. However, in this somewhat low-light world, I was able to see a number of fish in the run, and we can look at that footage in a moment to help better understand what fish do in their underwater homes. Well, let's start with the overhead view of the run first, and that will give us a perspective of what we see once we dive under the surface. This section of water perhaps looks like your typical classic run. However, once we go under, you will see it is far more complicated. To the right, which is obviously upstream, there is the faster riffle water running over a bed of cobblestone, creating some whitewater. This is just to the very top right side of the screen, so you can't really see much of it. As the water flows into the run, the depth increases and the river widens, causing the water to slow down and lose its whitewater properties. To the left, just out of range of the view, is the shallow tail-out section where the water speeds up again. I'm going to identify 3 areas in this clip, and those will be the 3 main areas we will look at closer under the surface. The first is the lower boulder. You can't see it underwater due to the glare, but it's right beside this boulder protruding from the water. The second is the region between the highlighted boulders. This area is made up of sand, light gravel, and submerged boulders. Pretty much all those dark spots you see are submerged rocks and boulders. All the light stuff in between is very fine gravel or sand. The third is the upper boulder, which is actually a pair of boulders side by side, with only one of the larger boulders protruding out. Now let's dive into this a bit more and go under the surface where the fish actually are. We start by looking just up from the lower boulder. There are numerous boulders, but also the bottom is made up of mostly sand and light gravel amongst the boulders. That immediately tells me that there's a significant slowing of the current in this area. Only by a shift from fast to slow water do you get a significant amount of light debris like this on the bottom. If the water was faster, those boulders would be far more exposed, and the fine sand on the bottom would be swept away, leaving more bare rock. What I suspect by looking at the scene is that there is fast water upstream, which we saw from the overhead shot, carrying fine sediment, but at this point the river gets deeper, which immediately creates a slowing of the current and a prime spot to deposit light material, such as sand. It also suggests a good place for fish, as the change in depth and the associated change in flow speed indicates where food would get flushed to and deposited. And the slowing of the current would be less work for the fish. Depth, food, and shelter from the flow. Good fish habitat, as it offers cover, calories, and comfort. And indeed, there are fish here, but clustered in one spot. And you see that branch there with that shiny object? Yeah, that shiny object is one of my flies. There is one cutthroat trout and several whitefish here. I've moved the camera slightly to the left to better see the group of whitefish that are sitting closer to me. You can still see my fly there, so I haven't moved more than about a foot. But notice how the nearby whitefish are sitting in relative comparison to the trout and whitefish further away. They're only about a foot or two apart, but the pod of whitefish closest to me are literally facing towards the camera, pretty much diagonal to the stream bed, and diagonal to the direction the trout and whitefish just 2 feet away are facing. Sometimes they are more than 45 degrees off from the fish that are further out. Why is that? Can you see how they are sitting right close to a boulder? It's tough to see as the camera doesn't quite capture it, but the camera is pretty much resting right against the rock. The fish are close to that rock, as well as sitting behind some woody debris, the same woody debris that did a good job of taking my fly when I was trying to present the drift on the far side of that rock. The one rock that is buried in front of them is naturally giving them some break from the head-on current. But I think the more interesting hydrological effect is keeping in mind that the fish do face into the current, how much the water has to be deflecting off that large rock, probably in combination with the wood and other debris around there, to make the whitefish sometimes almost be swimming sideways to what we would assume from above is the natural flow of the current. We have some fish facing straight upriver, and other fish facing almost sideways or 90 degrees to what we think would be upriver. The impacts of this are twofold. First, sneaking up on those fish, if they were spooked, would be very tough. Even from downstream, they would see you, although they clearly have less fear of the camera. Remember, they cannot see me where I am, as the camera is on a pole about 15 feet long. Second, your fly, as it goes around a boulder, definitely is not going to flow straight downriver in the path your rod tip might be going. It's going to take a dodge to the right and deflect with the current towards the mid-river section. Just watch some of the leaves and debris as they slide into that current. Some just free fall to the bottom. Some goes left, some goes right. I believe when you start to understand how water flows and the consequences it has on both the fish and your drift, you're going to be much better with your presentation skills. This is an example of why pocket water presentation can be much more difficult to get a natural drift in, and why you often want to fish just a single fly. With multiple flies drifting through this spot, I'm convinced that each fly would most likely be pulled in different directions, fighting each other, and probably doing a really poor job of convincing the fish. Did anyone ever promise you fishing would be easy? Let's just watch these fish a little bit longer. Let's move upstream somewhat to see what's up there. This is the area between the boulders on the overhead view that we had. There are a couple of fish nearby, but over the next 20-25 feet upstream it is very quiet. There's more of a cluster of boulders further up as well, closer to the fast water. We'll get to there in just a bit. Now let's scan some more further downstream where the water starts to shallow out and speed up to see if we can find some more fish there. Oh, hey, there's a crayfish tucked into a crevice on a log. No real fish of any significance though that we can see around here. Overall, it's pretty quiet down in the tail section. Now let's come up behind those fish we saw earlier and check out the downstream side of the lower boulder that they are congregating around. There's a fair bit of light debris in the form of sticks and sand directly behind the boulder, which would be completely natural for an object that slowed down the current a lot. And there are the fish. They aren't behind the boulder though, not in the slack water. Instead, they are still alongside the boulder where there is loose gravel and evidently slightly more water flow. They aren't really alarmed by the camera either. Let's move on to some new subjects now further upstream. We're moving upstream about 50 feet now to check out the area around another large boulder where I caught a number of fish. This is the upper boulders that was in the overhead clip. We're in slightly faster water and this makes the camera bounce a bit more, so please bear with me if it isn't too stable. But there's a better fish. And it isn't alone. Between the two boulders just up from it, we can just make out in the shadowy water perhaps 6 to 8 more fish. The forms aren't fully distinct, but they look to be whitefish to me. But I am more interested in the healthy-looking, sizable rainbow trout closer to us. It's not a coincidence that probably the better fish in the run, as well as several other fish, are here. Look at the features. Water flow is decent, likely bringing in food, and the large boulders on either side both funnel food between them. Also offer the fish a break from the current if they choose to move closer to them. Comfort is nearby. Furthermore, look at the woody debris between the boulders just on their upstream side. They aren't clearly seen, but you can just see them well enough to know that they offer cover and protection for the fish as well. It's quite an ideal holding spot. It would also be a very tough place to target any of these fish as there are boulders to either side and branches crisscrossing just upstream of them. It doesn't give one much time to set up a drift for a nymph and line it up with a fish. Regardless though, this is probably one of those sittings where I feel I could just watch these fish for a few hours. Now let's look back over what we have seen here today. Most fish were tight to boulders, within a foot or so. Clearly an important structure for holding fish. Water currents make for complicated presentations around these boulders, and this was by no means a region of extreme pocket water either. This can make fly presentation and sneaking up on fish far more difficult than it may initially seem, as your fly may not be taking the best course to reach each fish. Using a single fly will be an advantage in waters like this to get a more natural presentation and in getting closer to the fish. Sneaking up on fish is often far more complicated than you might assume. Even in fairly straightforward runs like this, with only a few boulders laying about, the fish can be facing many different directions than you anticipate. Now for the fun part. How would I fish this run? The first area, the lower boulder, if I want a natural drift, which I do, I will go with a light leader and a single 3.0 to 3.3 millimeter nymph. I wanted to get down to the fish and flow with the current in a natural manner. Thinner leader and a marginally lighter fly will do that. A 4mm bead is too heavy here. Even a 3.5 might be a tad too heavy to flow naturally. In the next location, the upper boulder, let's say that's a pretty tricky spot and well protected. You're not going to get a long drift opportunity here where you can cast a fly far ahead and let it sink down to the correct depth. It's going to be a tuck cast and make the fly sink fast. I'll need a heavier pattern here than I would use in the other spot, probably 4mm. Well, at least those are the techniques that worked for me. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.